Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a question that, it sounds incredibly simple on the surface, but the more I've sat with it this week, the more I think it actually determines the quality of your entire life.
Oh, wow. Setting the bar high right out of the gate.
Hey, we have to. But seriously, think about this. When you look at your world, when you look at your job, your relationships, your future, even just your bank account, is it simple or is it complicated?
That is a loaded question.
Yeah.
Because I think for most people, the immediate answer is complicated.
Right.
Extremely complicated.
Right, and we usually assume it's complicated because the world itself is complicated. I mean, we have inflation, we have family drama, work stress, the news cycle, and we usually think of vision, the act of seeing all that stuff, is just a physical act.
You open your eyes and light hits the retina.
Boom, you see what's there.
Right.
But what if vision is actually a mechanism? What if it's a tool that you can adjust? And what if the way yours is currently set is the actual reason you're so exhausted?
Yeah, it's the difference between seeing the world as it is and seeing the world as we are, which is a huge distinction.
Exactly. So today we are diving into a really fascinating, honestly slightly dense, but incredibly rewarding source titled The Carpenter's Square.
It's a great piece of work.
It really is. It's this rich blend of biblical scripture, ancient Greek and Latin etymology, and some very practical philosophy. And I'll be honest, when I first saw the title, I thought we were going to be talking about woodworking.
Like a DIY tutorial.
Yeah, I was ready for, how to build a cabinet.
I mean, we sort of are,
Mm,
but not the kind you do out in a garage.
no safety goggles required.
Well, maybe for the soul. Because if you think of this deep dive as an investigation into the geometry of the soul, that really captures it.
I love that phrase.
The source material makes this really compelling argument that modern burnout, that specific feeling of constantly trying to control outcomes and just failing, is actually a vision problem. It's about how we judge, how we see, and ultimately how we find peace.
The geometry of the soul. Okay, so look, just to set the tone here for everyone listening, this isn't a sermon.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to preach at you, but we are going to look at some ancient mechanics of the human heart that answer a very modern problem, which is, why are we so tired from trying to be good?
It's the exhaustion of performance. And the source argues that this exhaustion starts with the eye.
So let's unpack this. The source starts with a scripture from Luke chapter 11, which is a passage I've heard 1,000 times, but I never really thought about the actual physics of it. It says, the light of the body is the eye.
Right. And the full verse is, therefore, when thine eye is single, thy whole body also is full of light. It's a very famous passage.
Super famous.
But the source digs into the original language to show us that the word single doesn't mean what we think it means in modern English.
Right. It's not about laser focus.
Exactly. It's not about being single-minded in a hustle culture kind of way, like I'm grinding toward my goal.
This is where the history geek in me got really excited because they use this analogy of a folded cloth to explain the original Greek word. Can you break that down? Because when I hear single, I think one, but here it implies unfolded.
Yeah, it's a brilliant image. So in the ancient Greek context, the word used there is hapless. And to understand hapless, you kind of have to understand its opposite. In the ancient world, if a merchant was selling a piece of cloth, a complicated cloth was one with many folds.
Right, because you could hide things in the folds.
Exactly. If the cloth is folded over on itself, you can't see the tears, you can't see the stains, the imperfections. It's inherently deceptive.
You're hiding the reality of the fabric.
Right. But a hapless cloth, a single cloth, was unfolded. It was totally open, transparent. You could hold it up to the sun and see right through it.
So having a single eye isn't about staring intensely at one object. It's about transparency. It's about not having a hidden agenda as you walk through your life.
Precisely. It implies a perspective with no double-mindedness. When your eye is hapless, your character is unfolded. There's no angle you're working. You aren't trying to subtly manipulate a situation to get what you want.
And the source argues that when you live like that, the whole body is full of light. Because you aren't burning all this massive energy trying to manage the folds or, keep your story straight.
You're just being real.
But then the source contrasts this with the evil eye. And I think most people hear evil eye and they think of a curse or some old superstition.
Yeah, someone giving you a spooky glare across the room.
Right. But the Greek here is poneros. And this definition really shifts the paradigm for me. Poneros doesn't just mean wicked in a villainous mustache-twirling sense. It specifically refers to something that causes pain or toil or labor.
The source uses the metaphor of a damaged tool.
Okay, so imagine you're a carpenter, since we're talking about the carpenter square. You have a saw. If that saw is sharp and straight, if it's single, it cuts through the wood effortlessly.
It does what it was designed to do.
Exactly. But if the saw is rusted, bent, and dull, if it's Poneros, what happens?
Well, you have to work 10 times as hard to make the same cut.
You're sweating, you're frustrated, you're exhausted.
And you probably ruin the wood in the process anyway. That is the evil eye. It's a way of looking at the world that makes life incredibly difficult. It drags, it creates friction.
Yeah.
When you look at your life through a lens of fear or jealousy or needing to be right, you are essentially trying to cut wood with a bent saw.
Which brings us to my favorite and simultaneously most terrifying analogy from this whole stack of notes, the Jell-O pool.
Oh man, I think everyone felt that one. It's such a visceral image.
The source argues that a blind perspective, or living with this Poneros eye, is like trying to swim through a giant pool of Jell-O.
Which sounds fun for about 5 seconds.
And then it sounds like a literal nightmare, a sticky, suffocating nightmare.
Think about the physics of that. In water, there is resistance, sure, but there is also flow. You glide.
Yeah.
In Jell-O, every movement requires massive resistance.
You have to pay with your own brain power, your own emotional energy for every single inch you move forward. You are fighting the very medium you are moving through.
And here's the kicker, and I think this is where it really applies to you, the listener, in your career or your daily life. From the outside, swimming in Jell-O looks really impressive.
That's the trap.
It is. If you're swimming in Jell-O, you're thrashing. You're sweating. You look so industrious. You look like you care so much. People probably say, wow, they are the hardest worker in the room.
But it's totally inefficient. You're burning out just to stay in the exact same place.
Yeah.
That hit home for me because I think a lot of us feel like we're swimming in Jell-O. We're working hard. We're trying to be good people. We're trying to fix our families, save the world, whatever. But it feels like drag. It feels heavy.
Yes.
And the source is saying that's not necessarily a circumstance problem. You don't need a different pool. That's a vision problem.
It is. You're fighting the friction of your own double-mindedness. You're trying to manage the folds while swimming. And it leads to that haunting question from the Gospel of Matthew. What will a man give in exchange for his soul?
Right. If you get everything you want, the promotion, the relationship, the status, but you exhaust your soul swimming through Jell-O to get it, what kind of deal is that?
You've spent your soul to buy the world. And the source says that is just a bad trade.
So if that's the physics of how we see the friction versus the flow, let's talk about what we actually see. Because the source makes this point that seeing isn't passive. It calls it tracking.
Right. And this is where neuroscience meets theology beautifully. Our brains are designed to lock onto a target and sync with it. Think of a missile tracking system.
Okay.
The brain doesn't naturally distinguish between a good target and a bad target. It doesn't have a morality filter on the mechanism itself. It just excels at the process of following whatever you tell it to look at.
So if I tell my brain to look for reasons why my spouse is annoying.
Your brain is a faithful servant. It will find 1,000 reasons. It will track annoyance. It will highlight every sock on the floor and every interruptive comment.
And the example they use to ground this is the ultimate origin story. Eve in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 3:6.
This is a masterclass in tracking. The scripture says Eve saw that the tree was good for food, delightful to the eyes, and desired to make one wise.
She didn't just glance at it.
No, she didn't just notice it in passing. She tracked it. She locked on.
And here's where it gets really interesting with the words.
Mm-hmm.
Because the source points out that in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the word for saw there is eidon.
Eidon. It's a heavy word.
Yeah.
It's actually where we get the English word video.
And idea.
Yes. And, crucially, it's connected to the word idol.
Okay, let's stop there for a second because that is a massive connection. Video, idea, idol. Connect those dots for us because that feels like a leap at first glance. But the source says it's the exact same root.
It is the same root. Think about the progression here. Eve looked at the fruit. She formed a mental image, a video or an idea in her mind.
She didn't just see a piece of fruit.
Right. She saw a future where she was wise. She saw a future where she didn't need God to tell her what was good or evil. She constructed a whole alternate reality where the fruit was the source of her happiness.
She ran the simulation.
Exactly. She put that image, that idea, into her heart.
And that is the definition of idolatry.
Precisely. We tend to think idolatry is bowing down to a golden statue in a dusty temple somewhere. But the source defines it much more practically. Idolatry is taking a created thing, or even an idea of a created thing, and expecting it to give you what only God can give.
So if I have an idea that if I just get this job, I'll finally feel secure, I'm tracking an idol.
You are tracking it. You've created a video in your head of how that job will save you. And because you are tracking it, you will eventually consume it.
Right.
Eve saw, and then she took. You become what you behold. She expected the fruit to give her wisdom and peace.
She walked by sight, not by faith. And the source says faith is the power source. Without it, you're running on your own batteries, and that's why you're exhausted. That's why you're in the jello.
And when the idol fails you, because created things always fail to satisfy the soul eventually, you have to deal with the pain. Which leads to another really vivid image the source pulls from Proverbs 23, the drunken sailor.
Oh, this one was weirdly specific. I loved it.
It is. It describes a person who is tracking wine. It says, do not gaze at wine when it is red, because in the end, it bites like a snake.
But the person becomes like someone sleeping on the top of the rigging of a ship in the middle of a storm.
Which is pure insanity. You'd fall off. You'd be tossed into the sea.
But the verse says, they hit me, but I'm not hurt. It's total numbness.
Right. They beat me, but I felt it not. It's the result of tracking the wrong thing. You become numb to reality. You're tracking distraction or addiction or success, and you lose the ability to feel the reality of your own situation. You're just swimming in jello, numb to the pain, thinking you're fine because you can't feel the storm anymore.
That is a very sobering thought. We numb ourselves because the jello is too hard to swim through, so we just drift.
Exactly. We disassociate from the reality of our lives because we don't have the vision to navigate it clearly.
Okay, so we have the single eye versus the evil eye. We have tracking and idols. Now, I want to shift to the people who claim to see the best, the experts, the Pharisees, because the source spends a lot of time on the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit. And it brings up a word I honestly haven't thought about since 10th grade English, grammar.
This is a crucial pivot. Jesus said he didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. But he also said our righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees.
Which is wild because they were the experts.
They knew the rules better than anyone alive. But the source argues they fell into a trap of grammar.
Grammar. See, I hated grammar in school. I still barely know where to put a semicolon.
Most of us don't.
Right. But the history of this word is actually kind of magical, isn't it?
It really is. The Greek word is gramma, which literally just means letter. Now today, grammar is just rules, syntax, structure, it's dry. But originally, the art of letters was seen as a craft, almost like architecture.
Right. The source mentions the Middle Ages context.
Yes, so in the Middle Ages, very few people could read. So if you knew grammar, if you could decipher these weird markings on a page and extract meaning from them, it seemed like a supernatural power to everyone else.
It was like magic.
It's actually where we get the word glamour, in the old sense of casting a spell.
That's wild. So knowing the grammar was like holding the keys to the universe?
Exactly, and that mindset lingers. The Pharisees knew the grammar. They knew the text intimately. They were technicians of the text.
But they used God said to enforce man-made.
Yes. They built traditions around the law that became more important than the law itself.
The source calls it a veneer. Spit and polish. They looked absolutely great on the outside.
But inside, dead men's bones. Because, as the source quotes St. Paul, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. You can know the grammar of life perfectly. You can follow all the rules, check all the boxes, pay your taxes, mow your lawn, and look very polished to your neighbors.
You can have the perfect Instagram feed.
Exactly. But if you miss the intent, which is love, you're just puffed up, you're empty, you are an inflated balloon.
It reminds me of that quote the source used, which I wrote down. An ego fed is an ego bred, and an ego bred is not fit to lead.
That's a bumper sticker for life right there. If you are feeding your ego with your own goodness, you are unfit to lead yourself or anyone else.
And it points out that even Jesus turned down the title good teacher. He deflected it. He didn't want the ego boost.
He pointed back to the source. He said, "Why do you call me good? There is only one who is good." He refused to let his human ego take the credit.
Which brings us to the actual title of today's deep dive, The Carpenter's Square. This is about the concept of squaring the circle. Right.
Okay, I've heard this phrase, squaring the circle, usually meaning trying to do something impossible, like getting my toddler to eat broccoli is squaring the circle.
Very true.
But I never really understood the math behind it. How does it apply spiritually?
So in geometry, squaring the circle is the classic challenge of constructing a square with the exact same area as a given circle, using only a finite number of steps with a compass and a straight edge.
And can you do it?
No. It was proven to be mathematically impossible in the 19th century. You literally cannot do it.
Why not?
Because pi, the ratio involved in the circle, is an irrational number.
Right.
It goes on forever. You can't pin it down with a finite straight edge. The straight edge is too limited to capture the infinite.
Okay, so you cannot make the square match the circle. It's a fool's errand.
You cannot. But spiritually, we try to do it every single day. The source explains that the straight edge, the Carpenter square, represents human works. Our rigid, linear, finite attempts to be good.
Right.
The circle represents God's nature. Infinite, perfect, eternal love. And we exhaust ourselves trying to use our little straight edge to match his infinite circle.
We try to bring heaven down to earth using our will. We try to force God's infinite nature into our finite understanding. We try to, as the source says, domesticate God.
Domesticate God. That's a strong phrase, like we're trying to house train a lion or something.
It's a profound insight. It says we think we know what love is because we've felt it. So we turn God's infinite love, which is a prior, meaning it comes before everything, into a manageable, familiar feeling.
We box it in.
Yes, we try to live off the symptoms of love rather than the source itself.
It's the difference between a source and a resource. God's love is the source. Our love is just a response. And if we try to manufacture it, we burn out.
Exactly. We're trying to fulfill a supernatural law with a natural mindset.
Yeah.
St. Paul says the natural man cannot receive the things of the Spirit. It's foolishness to him. You can't square the circle. You have to stop trying to be the source of your own righteousness.
Which sounds terrifying, honestly, because if I'm not the source of my righteousness, who is? It feels like losing control. If I drop the straight edge, how do I measure up?
It does feel risky.
But the source argues this is actually where the relief comes in.
It leads to the final and honestly the most relieving part to this deep dive.
Yeah.
The difference between a test and a testimony.
This was my favorite etymological breakdown in the whole piece. Because we use these words interchangeably in church or in life, but they have completely different roots.
Completely different. Let's look at test. It comes from the Latin testum. It refers to an earthen pot, like a crucible used to melt down ore. You put the rock in the pot, turn up the heat, and see if there's any gold inside.
So a test is about heat. It's about pressure. It's about proving your quality from the inside out.
Right. Do I have what it takes? Am I good enough? That's a test. And life is full of them. But testimony comes from testes, which means witness.
And here's the cultural flip. Because today, when we say, this is my testimony, what do we usually mean?
We usually mean, this is my story. This is my truth. This is what I experienced.
Exactly. We make it internal. It's about me.
But the DNA of the word testimony is external validation. A testimony is not what you say about yourself. It is what a third party says about you.
If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true.
Jesus said that. He said, there is another who bears witness of me. In a court of law, you can't just stand up and say, I'm innocent, take my word for it. You need a witness.
Yeah.
A valid testimony legally requires 2 or 3 witnesses.
I really want you, the listener, to hear that, because I think so many of us are walking around acting as our own defense attorneys. We are constantly trying to prove to our boss, our spouse, our parents, to ourselves that we are good, that we are right.
And that is the Jello pool. That is the exhaustion. If you are your own witness, you are always on trial. Every single day is a court date. The source calls self-righteousness the consolation prize for ego.
Oof. Consolation prize for ego. That stings a little.
It should. But the relief, the true relief, comes when you realize you aren't the one who has to stand on the witness stand.
Yeah.
You don't have to prove you're right. You let God be the witness.
The source has this beautiful line. It is a lot easier to breathe when you realize you aren't the one who has to stand on the witness stand. That is the definition of peace.
It is. And it fundamentally changes how you deal with conflict. If you aren't trying to protect your own ego, you can actually love your enemies.
Yeah.
You aren't trying to win an argument. You're trying to be in the right relationship.
You aren't trying to square the circle of their behavior or force them to fit your straight edge. You just leave the geometry to God.
Beautifully said.
So bringing this all together, we started with the single eye, the unfolded transparent saw that cuts clean. We talked about how our brains track targets and create idols out of videos in our heads. We looked at the trap of grammar, focusing on the rules instead of the heart. And we realized the impossibility of squaring the circle with our own effort.
And the solution to all of it, the way out of the Jello pool, is to stop walking by sight and start walking by faith. To stop trying to be the source of your own love and righteousness, and to accept that God is the witness who validates you.
It reminds me of the final promise you wanted to bring up from Proverbs. It feels counterintuitive.
It's incredibly counterintuitive. Proverbs 16.7. When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him.
We usually think we have to fight our enemies to get peace. We have to defeat them or prove them wrong.
But the source says no. You focus on pleasing the Lord. You clear your vision. You make your eyes single. You unfold the cloth of your heart, and he handles the enemies.
He handles the witness stand, you just walk.
You just walk. You stop swimming in jello and you start walking in light.
So here is where we leave you today.
Yeah.
If you are feeling exhausted, if you feel like you are swimming through jello, what if that exhaustion isn't a sign of your failure? What if it's a built-in alarm system from your soul telling you that you're simply tracking the wrong target?
That's a great question.
Are you trying to be the judge, the jury, and the witness in your own life? Are you trying to square the circle with your own straight edge? It might be time to put down the tools. Stop trying to manufacture the feeling of love or goodness. Step down from the stand and let the witness speak for you. It's a much lighter way to live. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you in the next deep dive.